As the one-eyed god sat in his high seat above the world, he looked down through the smoke of the 9 countries at the cold lands of the north. What he saw there did not please him. He saw halls burned down to the sills. He saw the black ground where they had stood, with the snow lying in it. He saw kings poisoned at their own tables by the men who poured for them. He saw oaths sworn over ale and broken again before the cups went cold. He saw wolves standing in the hallowed places at midday. Nobody was willing to go out and drive them off. He saw longships going down within sight of their own shore. The fires were lit along the headland, and nobody came. The north did not need a hero. Heroes had come and gone there for as long as men had counted winters. The ground had taken every one of them in the end. What the north needed was a bloodline. It needed men born larger than other men, with something in them that would not bend. It needed men who kept an oath long past the hour when keeping it had begun to destroy them. No god could give a country a thing like that all at once. It had to be grown, and grown slowly, and watched the whole time it grew. They were called the Volsungs, and they were his own. He fathered the first of them himself, on a woman whose name nobody thought to write down. He walked into their hall one evening in a grey cloak, barefoot. A broad hat sat low over the place where his eye had been. He left a sword standing in a living tree and said nothing else about it. Years afterwards, he stood beside a river in a plain coat. He told a boy there which horse to choose and was gone before the boy thought to thank him. And on one grey afternoon in the south, on a field already lost, he came down a last time. He broke that same sword against the shaft of his own spear. Then he turned and walked away without a word to the old man who had carried it for 40 years. That was how he tended them. He gave and he came back and he took away again. He never once explained himself to any of them, but they would go further than he had asked. There would be a worm lying out on a heath in the north, gone long and dark and slow, with the gold of a drowned dwarf heaped under its belly. There would be a woman asleep on a mountain inside a ring of fire, in a mail shirt that had grown into a skin like bark over iron. There would be a hall far in the east, a long way from any sea, where a queen would set a dish down in front of her husband and wait quite patiently for him to finish it before she told him what it was. It was to be a ruin so complete and so patient and so exactly earned that men would still be singing it 400 years after the last Volsung was under the stones. It began a long way from all of that. It began in snow, with a hunt and with a lie told about a hunt. Part 1. Sigi. There was a man called Sigi, and men said he was a son of Odin. He was strong and well made. He had land and he had followers, and he was already past his youth. What he did not have was any patience with coming second. There was a thrall in that country called Bredi, who belonged to a man named Skadi. Bredi was a hunter. He was better at it than most free men were. One winter, Sigi took him out after game. They hunted all that short day and kept apart, and they came together at dusk to lay out what they had taken. Bredi's pile was larger. It was larger by a great deal, and there was no light left to argue about it in. Sigi said it was a strange thing for a thrall to out-hunt a king's son. Bredi replied that the day had gone the way the day went. Sigi killed him there on the hillside. He did it quickly, and there was nobody on that ground to see it done. Then he dug into a drift under the lee of a rock and put the body down into it and packed the snow back over the place. He rode home in the dark. He said that Bredi had gone off into the forest ahead of him and that he had lost him among the trees. The lie came out of him easily. It was the ease of it he remembered afterwards, and not the killing. But Skadi did not believe a word of it. The hunt had been his idea. Bready was the best thing he owned, and a man who owns a thing like that knows the hour it is taken from him. He sent searchers out at first light. They went over the whole of that ground, and towards evening they came on a drift lying higher than the drifts on either side of it. They put their spear butts into it. They found him under a foot of snow, with the cold holding him exactly as he had gone in. The country called that place Bready's Drift, and the name would stay on it long after every man in the story was dead. Sigi was named a wolf of the hallowed places. That meant he was no longer a man in law, and any farmer could kill him at a gate and owe nothing to anybody for it. He could not stay, and he did not try to. His father came for him. An old man fell in beside him on the road and walked with him out of the land. He walked further than an old man on foot should have been able to walk. He did not tire, and he asked nothing at all about the snowdrift. He brought Sigi down to the sea. Warships were lying there with men aboard and provisions stowed for a long voyage, and none of it had been there the week before. Sigi went down to the water to look at them. When he turned round to say what a man says at such a moment, there was nobody standing on the shore. He went east with those ships, and he did well. He fought where there was fighting to be had. He took what was worth taking, and he brought his men home more often than he lost them. In the end he won a country called Hunland and was king over it. He married a woman of that country. He had a son called Rerir, and the boy came up big even by the standards of that family. Sigi grew old in a hall of his own, and for a long while nothing came at him from any direction. But his wife had brothers, and the brothers had been counting. They had watched him take a kingdom out of nothing, and they had helped him hold it. Somewhere along the way they decided they had been paid too little for the help. They waited until he was old. They came at him in his own hall on a night when he had few men about him, and they killed him there. It cost them more men than they had allowed for. It was the first Volsung death under a roof, and it would not be the last. Reir was in the north when it happened. He came back with more men than his uncles had counted on, and he sent nobody ahead to talk. He killed every one of them. He took the land and held it, and he was a greater king than his father had been, and in 20 years he did not lose a foot of it. He married a woman whose good sense was spoken of in countries she had never seen, and the two of them had no children. They had none for a long time. They had none for so long that the household stopped mentioning it, which is the worst stage of that particular trouble. They prayed for a son, both of them, in the way people pray after they have stopped expecting an answer. Frigg heard them. She spoke of it to Odin, and Odin sent a wish maiden north, a daughter of the giant Hrimnir, whose name was Hjord. She took a crow shape and carried an apple in her claws. Reir was sitting out on a burial mound when the shadow went over him. The apple dropped into his lap. He looked up, and there was a bird already going away over the tops of the trees, and nothing else in the sky at all. He carried the apple down to the queen, and they ate it between them, and neither of them asked as many questions as they might have. Before that winter was out, she knew she was carrying a child, but Reir never saw it. He went out on campaign in the summer, as he had gone out every summer of his life. He took a sickness in a camp south of his own border and died of it in a tent. They buried him with everything a king should have under him. His wife stayed at home and went on carrying his son. She carried him for 6 years. 6 winters came and went, and the child did not come with any of them. She grew heavy, and then she grew ill, and then she grew tired in a way that no rest touched. At the end of the 6th year she understood that she would die of it either way. She asked to have the child cut out of her while there was still time for it to matter. They did as she asked, though the men who did it were afraid of what they would find. He came out grown, or very near it. He had hair on his head and teeth in his mouth, and the size of a boy of some years. He leaned over the bed and kissed his mother. She had breath enough left to give him his name. She called him Volsung. He was king of Hunland before he could carry a sword properly, and the country waited for him without complaint, because it had nothing better to do. Far off in a wood, a giant's daughter who had once flown north with an apple in her claws was told what she was to be, and she took it quietly. That spring she walked down to the coast and stood a long while looking north over the water at a country she had never seen, where a boy was growing at a rate that frightened his own household. Part 2. Barnstokkr, Volsung grew, and the country grew used to him. By the time he was a man, there was nobody left in the north who thought his birth strange. He married Hjord, as had been arranged before he could walk. It was a good marriage, which was not what anyone expects of an arrangement made in a wood. And he built himself a hall. There was an oak standing on the ground he chose, and he did not cut it down. He built the hall around it. The trunk came up through the floor in the middle of the room, thicker through than 2 men standing together, and went out through a hole cut for it in the roof. The branches spread over the thatch and shaded it all summer. Men called that tree Barnstokkr, which meant the child trunk, and the hall came to be known by the tree in countries where nobody had ever set foot in it. Inside, the fires were laid in a line down the length of the floor. A man walking from the door to the high seat walked past 9 of them. The smoke went up and found the roof hole and mostly went out of it. The benches were long, and there was wool laid along them. The walls were hung with shields, and above the shields the wood had gone black with 40 years of smoke. In winter, the oak dripped a little onto the boards near the 3rd fire, where the heat worked at the frost in the bark, and a bucket stood there to catch it. Somebody emptied that bucket every morning without ever being told to. It was that kind of house. Volsung and Hjord had 10 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest 2 were twins, a boy and a girl, and they were the best of the family, in a family where that meant a great deal. The boy was Sigmund, the girl was Signy. They were not alike to look at, but they were alike in some way that people noticed and could never name. Signy would be the one who saw the thing coming. Sigmund would be the one still on his feet at the end of it. But a daughter in that house was worth something to other kings, and word of her went south. Sigi, who was king over Gautland, came north to ask for her. He came with a good many men and a good many gifts. He asked for her properly, and there was nothing in his conduct a man could put a finger on. Volsung talked it over with his sons, and the sons were for it. Gautland was a strong country and a friendly one, and there were worse things a king could do with a daughter. Signy asked to speak with her father alone, and he took her aside. She said she did not want the match. She did not say Sigurd was cruel, or that she had heard anything spoken against him, because she had not. She said only that she did not want it, that no good would come of it, and that she was asking him to send the man home. Volsung told her he had already given his word. He said it kindly, and he took her hand while he said it. He told her a king's word given in his own hall could not be taken back for a feeling. He told her she would find it easier once she was there, and that Sigurd would treat her well. Signy did not argue. She said she would do as he wished, and she went out and she was married in that hall before the leaves were off the oak. She had known what he would say before she walked into him, and she had walked in anyway, and out of everything that came afterwards, that was the only part she was ever ashamed of. The wedding feast ran the best part of a week. All 9 fires were lit down the middle of the floor and kept lit day and night. There was ale and there was roast meat, and there was more noise under thatch than it had heard in years. On the last evening the doors stood open at both ends for the air, and the firelight went out through them into the dark on both sides of the house. A man came in at the open door and walked up the hall, and nobody on the road that day had seen him coming. He was barefoot. He wore linen breeches tied at the ankle, and over them a cloak that had been grey a long time ago. He was very tall, and he was very old. A broad hat sat low on his head. Beneath it, on the left there was one eye, and on the right there was something that nobody in that hall wanted to look at directly. He did not greet the king. He walked to the oak with a sword in his hand and put it into the trunk. He put it into the hilts. The wood took it, the way still water takes a drop stone. Then he turned round and spoke, and he did not raise his voice, and every man on both benches heard him to the last word. "Whoever draws this sword out of this tree shall have it from me as a gift," he said, "and he shall find, as long as he carries it, that he never held a better in his hand." He walked back down the hall and out through the door, and the dark took him. Afterwards, not one of the men sitting nearest the door could say which way he had gone. Sigurd went first, because he was a king and a guest. He set his feet and pulled, and the sword did not shift by the width of a nail. Volsungs went next, and he was a strong man still, and it did not shift for him either. Then the sons of Volsungs tried it in their order, from the eldest downward, and the hall got quieter with every one of them. But Sigmund came last, and by then he was not trying seriously. He put one hand on the grip, and it came out the way a knife comes out of a cheese. He stood there in the smoke holding it, looking at it and not at anyone else. It was the finest thing anybody in that room had ever seen. Every man on both benches understood at the same moment that it had been waiting in the wood for that hand and no other. But Sigurd wanted it before he had finished looking at it. He offered 3 times its weight in gold, and he offered it out loud in front of the whole hall, which was a mistake, though not the one that mattered. Sigmund could have refused him in 6 words and let the evening go on over the top of it. What he said was this: "You could have taken it out of the tree yourself, if it had ever belonged in your hand. It stood there for you exactly as long as it stood there for me. You will not have it now, though you weigh out every ounce of gold you own." Sigurd laughed and said something pleasant and let it go. But he was a man who had just been made small in front of 200 people, and he had never let anything go in his life. He had decided what he would do about it before the laugh was out of his mouth. He sat back down, he drank and he talked, and he was good company for the rest of that night, and nobody watching him would have found one thing wrong. He left in the morning, a day earlier than had been arranged. He took Signy with him and said the wind was right, and he did not care to waste it. At the water's edge he turned and invited Volsung and all his sons south to Gautland in 3 months. Volsung said that they would come, and gave him his hand on it. The sails went out across the sound and got small and went round the headland. Behind them, up the slope, the hall stood empty in the middle of the day, with the 9 fires burned down to grey. In the middle of the floor the oak stood with the cut still in it, dark at the edges and already beginning to close, healing over the way a tree heals over anything that is put into it. Part 3. Gautland, the 3 months went. By the way, 3 months go by in a country with nothing wrong in it. Volsung took 3 ships south in the spring, and every one of his sons went with him. They made the Gautland coast in the evening and lay up offshore for the night, meaning to go in with the light. Signy came down to the water in the dark, and had herself rowed out to her father's ship. She told him that the army was already gathered. She told him it had been gathered for a month, that it was drawn up 1/2 mile inland behind the ridge, and that it was larger than anything 3 ships could carry. She asked him to put about and go home while the dark held, and she said she would go back up to the house and nobody would know she had come. Volsung heard her out. Then he told her, "No, I said a thing when I was young," he said. "I said that I would never run from fire or from iron, whatever age I got to. I have said it in every hall I have drunk in for 50 years. I'm too old to start saying it differently." Signy asked to stay on the ship and die with her brothers. He told her to go back up to her husband's house and stay in it, whatever she heard from the shore. She went because he told her to, and because she had not yet learned that there was another way of answering him. They came in at first light, and Siggeir's army was already on the sand. Volsung and his sons formed up with the sea behind them. That was not a thing men did when they expected to win. He went through the Gautland 8 times that morning. He went through it and turned and came back through it, with his sons closing up behind him. After the 5th crossing, the men in front of him stopped trying to hold the ground where he stood. They opened and let him come. On the 8th crossing, they took him from 3 sides at once. He went down in the shallows, and the tide came up over him while the fighting was still going on further up the beach. All 10 of his sons were taken alive. That was not luck. Siggeir gave the order to kill them on the sand where they stood. But Signy asked him not to. She asked him to put them in the stocks instead and leave them there a while. She said that a quick death on a beach was a mercy, and that she did not want her brothers to have one. Siggeir looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed and said she was a better woman than he had taken her for, and he gave her what she asked. He was pleased with her for the rest of that day. He was pleased with her all that week. He never once suspected that she had just bought her brothers 9 nights, and that she would spend every one of them working. They took a great tree that had come down in the forest and set it across a clearing. They locked the 10 of them into it by the feet. The brothers sat in a row along the trunk with their backs against the bark. At about midnight, a she-wolf came out of the trees. She was very large, larger than the wolves of that country grew. Men said afterwards that she was Sigurd's mother, wearing another shape. Other men said that she was only a wolf out of the wood, and the story never settled it. She took the brother at the end of the row and ate him where he sat. The other 9 watched her do it, and not one of them could get a hand free. She came back the next night. She came back the night after that. She came every night at the same hour, and every night she took the man at the end of the row, and every night the row was shorter by 1. Signy sent a servant out to the clearing every morning to see who was left. On the 9th morning he came back and told her there was 1. But on the 10th night she sent the same man out with honey. He smeared it over Sigmund's face and worked what was left of it into his mouth. Then he went away. He left him sitting there in the dark with his feet in the trunk and his face sticky, and the smell of it going out across the clearing on the cold air. The wolf came at midnight, as she always came. She smelled the honey a long way off. She licked his face all over, and then she pushed her tongue into his mouth, to get at the rest of it. Sigmund bit down. He got the tongue between his teeth at the root, and he held on. The wolf pulled back, and he came with her, because his feet were still fast in the wood. The trunk came up out of the ground and split along its length. She threw herself backwards to get free, and he did not let go. She tore her own tongue out at the root, and she died of it there in the clearing, and it took her some time. Sigmund sat in the wreckage with a mouthful of blood and honey, and did not move for a while. Then he understood that his feet were loose. He was the last of 11. He sat where he was a long time before he stood up. Standing up meant that the next part had started, and he was in no hurry at all for it. When Signy's man came out at first light, he found a broken trunk, and a dead wolf lying on its side with its jaw open, and 9 worn places along the log where the bark had been rubbed smooth, and nobody sitting in any of them. Part 4. The earth house. They dug it into the side of a bank under a fallen tree, and roofed it with turf laid over birch poles. The smoke hole came up among the roots, where nobody would look at it twice. Inside there was room to lie down and room to sit, and no room for very much else. The floor was earth and stayed cold the whole year round. There was a hearthstone and a pot and a bed of skins along one wall, and the sword hanging on 2 pegs above the bed. After a while there was a second bed. Sigmund lived in that hole for a long time. Nobody in Gautland knew that he was alive except his sister and 1 servant. The servant would have died before he told it, and in the end he would. Signy went up to the hall every day and was Sigurd's queen. She sat at his right hand and ran his house and bore him sons. She did it well, and she did it for years. Nobody who watched her in all that time ever caught anything in her face. But she was not raising those boys to be Sigurds. When the eldest was 10, she sewed the sleeves of his shirt to his arms, through the cloth and through the skin, and pulled them off again. The boy cried out. She sent him out to the wood the next morning with a sack of meal. There was a snake down in the meal. She told him to give the sack to the man in the earth house, and to do whatever the man told him. Sigmund told him to make bread of it. The boy came back up the hill in the evening. He said that he had not made the bread. There was something alive in the flour, and he had not liked to put his hands into it. Signy walked out to the wood that night and told her brother that the boy was no good and that he should kill him. Sigmund said the boy had done nothing to him. Signy said that she knew that and that he should kill him anyway. He did it. The next year she sent the second boy with the same sack. He put his hands in and felt the thing move and took them out again, and came home and said what his brother had said. She told Sigmund the same thing, and Sigmund did the same thing, and afterwards the 2 of them never once spoke of either boy again. In no telling of it did either of them argue about it. The horror was never in the doing, it was in how little either of them needed to say in order to arrange it. But Signy had worked out something by then that she had not yet said out loud. The boys had failed because they were half Sigurds. Everything in that house was half Sigurds, and always would be, and a thing that was half Sigurds would never walk into that hall and finish him. A woman came through the country that autumn who knew how to change one shape for another. Signy took her into a side room and closed the door, and the 2 of them came to an arrangement. Nobody ever wrote down what Signy paid, and nobody ever would. They traded faces for 3 nights. The sorceress went up and slept in the queen's bed beside Sigurd, and did it well enough that he noticed nothing at all. Signy walked out to the wood in a stranger's body and knocked on the turf above the door. But Sigmund did not know her. He took her in out of the weather. because that was what a man did, and she stayed 3 nights. He thought she was a woman from somewhere along the coast who did not care to talk. When she left on the 4th morning, he said he was sorry to see her go, and she made no answer to that at all. They traded back. Signy carried the child through the winter in her husband's house, and Siggeir counted the months and found nothing wrong with them. The boy was born in the spring, and she called him Sinfiotli. He came up fast and he came up hard. By the time he was 10, there was nothing of Siggeir in him anywhere. It was not in his face, and not in his hands, and not in the way he stood in a doorway. She tested him the way she had tested the other 2, because she had been wrong twice and did not mean to be wrong a 3rd time. She sewed the sleeves to his arms through the skin. The other 2 had cried out. Sinfiotli sat and watched her do it and said nothing at all. She pulled the sleeves away, and the skin came away with them. She asked him whether that had hurt. He said that Volsung would not have thought much of it. Then she sent him out to the wood with the sack. Sigmund told him to make bread. When he came back, in the evening the bread was made and standing on the stone, and Sigmund asked him whether he had found anything in the flour. "There was something in it when I began," Sinfiotli said. "I do not know what it was. I kneaded it in with the rest of it. It bit my hand twice at the start, and then it stopped." Sigmund told him not to eat that bread. He said that he could eat serpents himself, and that the boy could not, and he did not explain how he knew. It would be some years before Sinfiotli moved out to the earth house that spring and lived there with a man he believed was his uncle. Signy went back up the hill to a hall where nobody knew what she had done, and sat down at her husband's right hand and ran his house for him and waited. Below her, under the turf and the birch poles, 2 people who shared a great deal more blood than either of them had been told about sat on opposite sides of a small fire, not talking, cleaning a sword that had hung on the wall for 11 years. Part 5. The Wolf Skins. Sigmund kept the boy in that wood for years, and he never once told him what he was. He trained him the way a man trains a dog. He means to fight. They ran, and they carried weight, and they went hungry with food in the pot, because Sigmund wanted to see what hunger did to him. It did very little. Sinfiotli took everything that was done to him and then asked for the next thing. They lived as outlaws and took what they wanted. They went after men who should have been able to beat them and were not. Word went round that country that there were 2 of them in the forest, and that the younger one was worse. But one summer they went further in than they had ever gone, and they found a house. It stood among the trees with no track leading to it and no smoke coming out of it. 2 men lay asleep on the floor inside. Both of them wore heavy gold on their arms, so neither of them was anybody's thrall. And hanging above them on the wall were 2 wolf skins. Sigmund and Sinfiotli stood and looked at the skins for a while. They were king's sons, those 2 on the floor. Somebody had put a spell on them, and the skins came off them one day in 10, and that was the day. The story never said who had done it to them. It never said what they had done to deserve it either. Sigmund took one skin down, and Sinfiotli took the other, and they put them on to see how it felt. But they could not get them off again. They went out of that house on 4 feet. They could still think, and they knew each other perfectly well, but what came out of them when they tried to speak was a howl. They understood each other in it well enough. The world came at them differently down there. Smell did most of the work that sight had been doing, and sound arrived from much further off, and distance stopped meaning very much. Sigmund found that he could run the whole of a day without ever deciding to. Sinfiotli found that he did not want to stop running. Nothing in that wood smelled to him like anything at all except food. Neither of them said this to the other. There was no way in that language to say it. They agreed on one thing before they parted. If either of them met more than 7 men, he would howl, and the other would come. Sigmund met 7 in a clearing that day and killed all of them, and he was tired afterwards, and he howled. Sinfjotli came through the trees to him. The 2 of them lay down together in the leaves for a while, and then they parted again. Sinfjotli met 11 men. He killed all 11 of them alone, and he did not howl. Sigmund found him lying in the leaves afterwards with his tongue out, resting with the 11 lying around him where they had fallen. Sinfjotli told him about it. He said that Sigmund had needed help with 7 and that he had not needed help with 11. He said it the way a boy says a thing he's been waiting all afternoon to say. Sigmund went for his throat and opened it. He gave no warning at all. He took him at the windpipe, the way a wolf takes a thing, and he tore it out. Then he stood over him while the blood went down into the leaves. Then whatever was in the skin let go of him for a moment. He was an old man inside a wolf's body, watching his own son die on the ground in front of him, and he could not so much as say the boy's name. He carried him back to the house and lay down beside him and would not leave. 2 weasels came along the path in the morning and fought there. One of them bit the other through the throat exactly as Sigmund had done. Then it ran off into the wood and came back with a leaf in its mouth and laid the leaf over the wound. The dead one got up. The 2 of them went away together, both quite well. Sigmund was still watching the place where they had gone when a raven came over low and dropped the same leaf in front of him. He put it on Sinfjotli's throat, and the throat closed. He would remember those weasels for the rest of his life, and he would never tell one living person about them. They lay up in that house until the 10 days were out and the skins came off them. Then they carried the skins outside and burned them, and stood well back from the fire while they went. Both of them hoped that the burning would take the thing out of them. It did not entirely. Neither of them ever said so aloud. But each of them knew it about the other, and they were careful with one another for a long time afterwards. They came back to the earth house at the end of that summer. Sigmund looked at him across the fire one evening in the autumn and understood that there was nothing left to teach him. 3 miles down the valley, the lights of Sigurd's hall came on one at a time, the way they had come on every evening for 21 years. Part 6. The ale casks. They walked into Gautland after dark, and nobody stopped them, because nobody in that country had been looking for anybody for a very long time. Sigurd's hall stood on rising ground inside a stockade, with an outer room at the near end where the ale was kept. There were casks down both walls of that room, big ones, standing on frames to keep them off the floor. Sigmund and Sinfjotli got in behind them at the far end and settled down to wait for the house to sleep. It was cold in that room. It smelled of yeast and of wet wood, and the cold came up through the boards into them, and neither of them moved for 4 hours. There was a line of light along the bottom of the door into the hall, and the light went yellow and then went red and then went out. They heard the benches being dragged. They heard a woman laughing at something a long way off, and a dog put out, and a bar dropped across a door. Then they heard nothing for a long while but the ale working in the casks beside their heads. It was a small sound, and a steady one, and it went on all night. Signy knew they were in the house. She had known since the afternoon. But her 2 youngest children were playing in that outer room with a gold ring. They rolled it along the boards, and it went in under the casks. One of them crawled after it on his hands and knees and found two men sitting in the dark at the end of the row. The children looked at them for a while, then they went in and told their father. Signy heard them begin to tell him. She got up and took them both by the hand before they had finished, and walked them back out to the ale-room. She stood them in front of her brother and said what they had done. Then she told him to kill them both where they stood. But Sigmund said no. He said that he would not kill her children, whatever they had seen, and that she should not have asked him. Simpshotli did it while Sigmund was still speaking. Then he picked both of them up and carried them through into the hall and threw them down on the floor in front of Sigurd. After that the fighting was general. The two of them held the doorway for as long as two men could hold a doorway. They killed a great many. In the end they were taken alive by weight of numbers and rope. Sigurd sat up most of that night, working out what to do with them. Killing them was easy, and he did not want easy. In the morning he had a mound raised on the open ground below the hall. It was built of stone and turf. A great flat slab was set upright down the middle of it. The two of them would lie on opposite sides of that stone, able to hear each other and never able to touch. They put Sigmund into one half and Sinchotli into the other. Then men began laying the turf over the top of them, working from both ends inward, and the light in there went down by degrees all afternoon. It went from daylight to a grey the colour of water, to a seam along one edge no wider than a hand. Then a man knelt on that seam and closed it, and the two of them heard him stand up and walk away over their heads. Signy came down while the roofing was still going on. She had a bundle of straw with her, and she gave it to the men to throw into Simvjotli. She said it was meat, and that a man should not starve who was going to suffocate anyway. Sigurd let her do it. He was in a good mood that morning. But there was a sword in the straw. Simvjotli felt the hilt of it in the dark and knew it at once. He called through the stone to tell Sigmund what he was holding, and Sigmund told him to set the point of it against the top of the slab. They cut through the stone. They worked down through it from the top, one of them on the hilt and one on the point. They sawed at it in the dark, and neither of them could see his own hands. The sound it made was very small and very dry, and it went on for hours. Twice they stopped because they thought they heard somebody up on the turf, and both times there was nobody. Then the slab gave. By the middle of the night they were standing on the same side of it. After that the turf above them was nothing at all. They went up to the hall and stacked dry wood against the walls at both ends and fired it. Then they stood back from the doors and waited. The household woke in smoke. Sigurd called out from inside and asked who had done it. Sigmund told him. He said that Volsung had left rather more children behind him than Sigurd had allowed for, and he said it without raising his voice at all. Then he called for his sister to come out. He told her that she had been used badly for a long time, and that it was over now. He told her to come out to him, and that he would give her everything back. Signy came to the door. She stood in it with the fire going up the wall behind her, and she told them the truth. She told them what she had done to her first two sons, and why she had done it. She told them that she had walked out to the wood in another woman's shape and lain 3 nights with her own brother to get a son who would be worth something. She told them that Simfjotli was a Volsung on both sides, and that this was why he had never flinched at anything in his life, and that every single thing she had done in 21 years had been done to bring about that exact hour. I have worked so hard at bringing Sigurd down, She said that there's nothing left in me to live on afterwards. I was not glad to marry him. I shall be glad enough to die beside him. She kissed them both. Then she turned round and walked back into the fire, and she died in there with her husband and with everyone else in his house. She had been the only one of them who chose every single thing she did. Sigmund and Sinfjotli took ships and men and went north to the country that had been Volsungs. There was a man sitting in that high seat who had put himself into it, and he was gone inside a month. Sigmund was king in his father's hall before the winter, and he was a great king, and for a long while nothing came at him at all. Far behind them in the south, the ground where Sigurd's hall had stood stayed black through that winter and the next one. Nothing grew on it. The people of that country went round it rather than over it for years. Part 7. The poisoned horn. Sigmund held that country for a long time, and he held it well. He married a woman called Borghild out of Braland, and she gave him 2 sons. The elder was Helgi. The younger was Hamund. Helgi was born at night. The Norns came to the house while his mother still had him in her arms, and they fastened the threads of his life to the roof beam and to the ground east and west of it, and said that he would be the best of kings. That was what men said of him afterwards, at any rate. It was one of the few times such a thing turned out to be true. He was 15 when he killed King Hunding, and the sons of Hunding came after him for it, and he killed a good many of those as well. Then there was Sigrun. She was a king's daughter, and she had been promised to Hodbrod, who was a king's son and not a bad man, and she did not want him. She rode out to Helgi, where he lay with his ships, and told him so to his face. Helgi went and fought Hodbrod at Frekkastein and killed him there. Sigrun came down onto the field while the fighting was still going on further along it, and thanked him, and neither of them said anything about it afterwards that anybody wrote down. They had years together, and the years were fewer than the 2 of them were owed. Helgi went out of the story there in daylight, with his wife beside him and his ships drawn up on the sand, which was a great deal more than most of that family got. Sigmund's hall in those years was a comfortable place to sit in. The fires were kept up from the first frost to the thaw. There was wool along every bench, and a good deal of it on the floor as well. The ale was better than it needed to be, because the man who made it had been doing it for 30 years and took it seriously. Men came a long way to drink in that house, and stayed the winter, and went home in the spring saying so. Sinfjotli had a place near the high seat, and did not say much from it. Borghild ran the household, and ran it well, and had a brother of her own who came and went as he liked. But Sinfjotli and that brother wanted the same woman. They both asked for her, and neither of them would step back. They went out and settled it the way such things were settled in that country. Sinfjotli came back. Borghild's brother did not. Borghild wanted him driven out of the kingdom for it, but Sigmund would not do it. He offered her the fine instead, and he offered a great deal more than the dead man had been worth, and she took it because there was nothing else left to take. She asked one thing. She asked to hold the funeral ale herself in her own way, and Sigmund told her that she could. She held it well. There was room made for everyone who came, and she carried the horn round the benches with her own hands, which was a queen's work and an honour to the man being buried. She came to Sinfjotli with the first horn. "Drink, stepson," she said. He looked down into it. He said that the drink was clouded and that he would not take it. Sigmund was sitting beside him. Sigmund could eat the poison and take no harm from it, and every man in that hall knew it. He reached over and took the horn out of his son's hand and drank it off himself and set it down and said nothing at all about it. She went round the hall and came back with the second drink. Stepson, she said. Shimjotli said the same thing he had said before. Sigmund took that one out of his hands as well and drank it. She went round a third time. By then Sigmund had drunk a great deal one way and another, and he was very far gone in it. Drink, stepson, Simjotli said that the drink was foul. Let it strain through your beard, son, Sigmund said. Simjotli drank it. He put the horn down on the board and he was dead before his hand came off it. Sigmund got up. He was an old man and he had been drinking since the afternoon, and he picked his son up off the bench and carried him out of that hall himself, and would not let one man put a hand on him. He carried him all that day. He went north through the woods with him in his arms and did not stop and did not speak. The men who followed at a distance gave it up before evening and turned back. He went on into country he did not know. The trees changed, and then they thinned, and the ground under him went soft, and then went stony. Towards evening he could smell salt on the air, though there was no water anywhere in front of him that he could see. He did not put the body down once in all of that. His arms had stopped being arms some hours earlier. He carried with his back and his shoulders and with whatever a man has left after those give out. He came at last to a narrow firth with a boat drawn up on the sand. There was a man standing beside it. The man was old and he was very tall and he had one eye. He said that he would take the body over the water. Sigmund laid Simfjotli down in the boat. Then he went to get in after him, and the man said that the boat would not carry two, and that Sigmund would have to go round by the head of the firth and meet him on the other side. Sigmund turned and started along the shore. He had gone perhaps 20 paces before he looked back, but there was no boat on the water, there was no man on the sand. There was nothing at all on that firth from one shore of it to the other, and the water lay completely flat, and it stayed flat for as long as he stood there looking at it. He stood a long while. There was nothing left to go round to, and no reason to hurry anywhere, and he was not certain that his legs would take him in either direction. In the end he sat down on the sand and waited for the light. When it came he walked home the way he had come, with his hands empty, and he never told one person in that hall what he had seen at the water. He sent Borghild back to her own people when he got home. She was dead before the year turned, and he did not go to the burial. He was king in that country a long while afterwards. In the hall he had taken back, with the wool on the benches and the ale going round it and the place at his right hand empty. He was an old man now by any counting anybody used. 2 countries away, in a house he had never seen, a king's daughter was being taught to weave, and men had already begun riding out to look at her. Part 8. Hjordis. Sigmund was old by then, and he was still the strongest man in the north, and both of those things stayed true together for longer than anybody had expected. He had no wife. He had one living son, and the son was a child. He had a country and a hall, and nobody to leave either of them to. So he sent to King Eilimi and asked for his daughter. Her name was Hjordis. She was said to be the wisest woman in that part of the world, and the best to look at as well. Both things were said by people who had actually met her. That was not always the way of it. But Lingvi, the son of Hunding, had come asking for her in the same month. Lilimi had 2 kings under his roof, wanting the same thing, and whichever one he sent away would come back in the spring and burn the country. So he did the only sensible thing left to him. He put it to his daughter in front of both of them and told her to say which she wanted. That was not kind, and he knew it while he was doing it. She said it plainly enough. She said that Sigmund was old and that Lyngvi was not, and that she would take Sigmund. She said that a man's name was made out of what he had already done, and not out of how many years he had left to do more in. They were married that autumn. Lyngvi went home and said nothing to anybody. He came back before the ale was finished. He came with an army out of all proportion to anything Elimi could put in front of it. He landed while the harvest was still lying out in the fields. Elimi and Sigmund went down to meet him because there was no time left to do anything else. Linimi fell early. He was a good king. The story kept very little of him. What it kept was that he went out on the wrong morning and did not come back off the field. Sigmund went into the line and stayed in it the whole day. He was an old man carrying a sword that no shield in that country would stop. He went forward and the line went forward with him. Nobody stood in front of him longer than it took him to reach them. By the middle of the afternoon, his arm was red past the elbow, and his shield was gone. He had not slowed at all. The Hundings in the centre had begun to give ground without anybody telling them to. But a man came into the line in front of him who had not been there before. He wore a grey cloak and a broad hat pulled low over his face. He was barefoot, he had one eye, and he carried no shield at all. He held a spear up across his body and stood still and waited. Sigmund struck at the spear. Gram broke on the shaft. It went into 2 pieces, and both of them fell down into the grass. The old man was no longer standing there. There was nothing at all in the place where he had been. The line turned inside the hour after that. They took Sigmund down with wounds that nobody afterwards counted. The fighting went over him and past him and away from him down the slope. By dark, there was nobody left upright on that field, on either side, who was still interested in any of it. Hjordis came out at night with one servant and went over the ground looking for him. She found him alive. She wanted to get him to a house and have him tended. He told her not to bother. "The one who gave me that sword has decided the fight is over," he said. "He broke it himself in front of me. I'm not going to argue with him about it at my age." He told her to gather up the 2 pieces and keep them. He said that she was carrying a son and that the boy would be the best of the line, better than any of them, better than himself. He told her to have a sword made out of that iron when the boy was grown. He said it would keep the name Gram, and that the boy would do things with it that men would still be talking about when nobody remembered either of their names. Then he asked her to sit with him until it got light. She did that, and he died a little before it came. She had been married to him for less than a year. She sat out the rest of that night on a field full of dead men, with 2 pieces of a broken sword in her lap, and she was entirely calm about it. She stayed calm for the whole of the rest of her life. Ships came in at first light, and they were not Lyngvi's. Alf, the son of King Hjordis of Denmark, had put in along that coast on his way home. He had come up off the beach to see what had been done there. Hjordis heard them landing while they were still a long way off. She and her serving woman changed clothes before anybody reached them. The servant took the queen's dress and the queen's way of standing, and Hjordis put on the plain one and carried herself like a woman who worked for somebody. The servant did all the talking. She said she was the king's daughter, and that the other one was her maid, and Alf believed her, because there was no reason on that beach not to. He took them both aboard and treated the one in the good dress as a queen, and brought them home to Denmark. They stayed the winter in Hjaldbrek's house, and nobody found them out. But Alf's mother had been watching the 2 of them since the day the ships came in. She said to her son one evening that it was a strange household where the queen had the rough hands and the maid had the smooth ones. Said that he had not noticed it, so she set them a question in front of everybody. She asked the two of them how they knew the hour before dawn in winter, with no sky to look at. The one in the good dress said that she woke at that hour to drink milk. She said she had drunk milk at that hour every night as a girl and had never lost the habit of waking for it. The other one said that her father had given her a gold ring when she was small. She said the ring went cold on her finger a little before dawn, and always had done. Alf's mother said that it was a poor country where the bondwomen wore gold. Alf asked Hjordis who she was, and she told him, and she did not apologize for any part of it. He said that he had known for some weeks and had been waiting to see how long she meant to keep it going. He told her that if she had set it on the beach, he would have treated her exactly the same. She believed him, and she was right too. The boy was born in that house in the spring, and they called him Sigurd. Hjordis held him at the naming, and looked at him a long time without saying anything at all. Afterwards, he told the household that he had never seen eyes like that in a child's head. Whoever the boy took after, he said, it was not going to be a quiet man. Married Hjordis in the summer and was good to her for the rest of her life. In a chest in a back room of that hall, wrapped in wool and pushed underneath other things, 2 pieces of broken iron lay in the dark for 10 years and did nothing at all. Part 9. The Otter's Ransom. Sigurd grew up in Hjordis' house and was given everything a king's son was given, and a good deal more besides, because the whole household had decided very early what he was going to be. They gave him a foster father, as the custom was. The man they gave him was Regin. Regin was a smith, and he was the best smith in that country by a long way. He was also small. He was small in a way that had nothing to do with his height, although he was short as well, and men who worked beside him for years never quite got used to it. He was clever with metal. He was clever with words. He was cleverest of all at knowing what a boy wanted to hear. He taught Sigurd runes. He taught him to speak several languages and to play chess and to behave properly in a hall. He taught him all of it well. Everything Sigurd ever knew about anything except fighting came out of that forge. But Regin had been waiting 11 years for one particular conversation, and he began working towards it the moment the boy was old enough to be worked on. He did it sideways, the way he did everything. He said one afternoon that it was a strange thing for a king's son to own no horse. He did not say it as a complaint. He said it as a small remark about the world, and then he went back to what he was doing and let it sit there. Sigurd went to Hjordis and asked for a horse. Hjordis told him to go down and take whichever one he liked. There was an old man standing at the edge of the herd when Sigurd came to the river. He had a long beard, and he was not from anywhere near there. He asked the boy what he was doing, and the boy told him. The old man said that the way to choose a horse was to drive the whole herd into the deep water of the Bisseltjorn and watch which of them did not turn back. They drove them in. Most of the horses came round and made for the bank almost at once. One grey colt kept swimming. He went straight out into the middle of the river and across it and up the far side, and stood on the gravel there shaking the water off, and looked back as though he were waiting to be told the next thing. The old man said that the colt came of Sleipnir's stock. He said that Sigurd should take him and keep him, and that there would never be a better horse in the north. Sigurd turned to thank him for it. There was nobody standing there. He called the horse Grani. Regin waited until the winter before he said the other thing. They were in the forge in the evening with the fire down and the door shut. Regin said that Sigurd had a horse now, and a good one. He said that he still had no gold of his own. He said that a man who lived on another man's gold belonged to that man, whatever they called him at the table. Sigurd asked him what he was talking about. Regin sat down on the anvil block and told him. My father was called Hreidmar, he said. He was rich and he was hard, and he had 3 sons. I was one of them. I could work metal better than any man living, and that is not a boast. It is only a thing that was true. My brother Fafnir was the biggest of us and the grimmest, and he wanted everything he looked at. And there was Otter. Otter spent his days in the shape of an otter, because he liked it. He went down to Andvari's falls every morning and fished there, and he ate what he caught with his eyes shut, because he could not stand to watch himself eating. He was the best of the 3 of us. He was no trouble to anybody at all. 3 of the gods came walking along that river, and they were Odin and Hoenir and Loki. Loki saw an otter on the bank with a salmon in front of it and threw a stone and killed it. He was pleased with himself. He had got 2 things with one throw, and he said so. They skinned it and carried the hide along with them, and came at evening to a farmstead and asked for a night's lodging. But it was my father's house. Regin let that sit a while before he went on. We knew the skin the moment they put it down. We took the 3 of them where they sat, and my father named the price. They were to fill that hide with gold. Then they were to stand it up and cover the outside of it, so that no part of it showed anywhere at all. They agreed to it because there was nothing else in that room to agree to. Loki was sent out to fetch the gold. He went to Ran and borrowed her net, and he took it up to the falls where my brother used to fish. There was a pike in the pool under the water. He put the net over it and drew it out. The pike was a dwarf called Andvari, who had lived in that water a very long time, and had spent most of it putting gold into a hole in the rock. Andvari gave it up. He gave up all of it. He carried it out of the rock and piled it on the stone and stepped back, and he kept one ring closed inside his hand and said nothing whatever about it. Loki looked at the hand. He made him open it and took the ring off him. But then the dwarf said what he said. He did not shout it. He said that the ring would be the death of every man who came to own it. He said the gold would be the death of every man who came to own that. He said it would go on that way until there were none of them left anywhere. Then he went back into the rock and closed it behind him. He was not angry by the end. That was the part my father should have noticed. They filled the hide and stood it up and covered it over and stepped back. My father walked round it once and found a single whisker still showing at the muzzle. Odin took the ring out of his sleeve and laid it over the whisker, and the ransom was paid. Loki told him what was on that ring before he went out of the door. He said it in front of all of us, and he said it slowly. My father heard him. He thanked him for the information and kept the ring. But Fafnir killed him for it inside the year. He did it while the old man was asleep, which is a thing I have never once been able to say out loud in company. Then he came to me and told me that I would have nothing, and that if I asked him twice he would kill me as well, and I believed him. He carried every piece of it up onto Gnitaheath and made a place for it there, and lay down on top of it. He has been lying on it ever since. He never goes far from it. He grew as he lay, and somewhere in all that lying he stopped being anything I would call a brother. What is up there now is a worm the length of 3 ships, and there's not a man in the north who will go within a mile of that heath." The fire had gone right down by then. Regin's hands were on his knees, and he was looking at them and not at the boy, and he did not ask for one single thing. That was the cleverest work he did all evening. He would not have to ask. He had understood 11 years earlier that he would never once have to ask. Sigurd said nothing for a while. Then he asked how long the worm had been up there. Regin told him, and neither of them said anything else that night. Outside, the frost was coming down over the yard and the roofs. Up in the back room of the hall, 2 pieces of broken iron lay in a chest under a fold of wool, 3 walls away from a man who had spent 11 years working out how to get them into a fire. Part 10 gram. Sigurd asked Regin for a sword in the spring. Regin made him one. It was a good sword, and it had taken a month. Sigurd carried it out to the anvil in the yard and brought it down on the horn, and it broke. Regin said nothing about that at all and went back to his fire. The second one took him longer, and it was better. Sigurd took it out to the same anvil, and it broke in the same place, in front of the same people. This time Regin said something about his father and his brothers that he had not meant to say out loud. But Sigurd had stopped expecting anything out of that ford. He went up to the hall and found his mother and asked her whether it was true that his father's sword had been kept. Hjordis went and fetched the chest herself. She did not send anybody for it. She unwrapped the wool on the table in front of him, and there they were, 2 pieces of iron, with a break across them that had been made by a spear shaft 12 years before. She gave them to him. She said nothing whatever about what it had cost her to carry them off that field. He noticed that, and he never forgot it, and it was one of the reasons he turned out as well as he did. Regin took the fragments and looked at them a long while before he put them into the fire. That forging took him 3 days, and he did not sleep in any of them. The pieces went in and came up yellow and then came up white, and he worked at the break until it stopped being a break. Men who were in the yard said afterwards that fire came off the edge of it while he was drawing it out. They said it in a way that suggested they knew perfectly well how it sounded. What came off the anvil at the end of the 3rd day was longer than the sword Sigmund had carried. It was the same sword. Sigurd took it out to the anvil in the yard. The whole household came out to watch, because every one of them knew what was going to happen, and none of them knew which way. He brought it down and split the anvil to the block. Then he went down to the river with a lock of wool. He dropped the wool in upstream and held the edge steady in the current. The wool came down and went over the blade and came apart into 2 pieces, and neither piece slowed at all as it went. He said that this one would do. Regin began talking about Gnitaheath that same evening, but Sigurd would not go. He said that the man who killed his father was alive and ruling a country. He said that the sword in his hand had been broken in that fight and had a claim on it. He said that a man who took gold before he took vengeance had his order wrong. People noticed that kind of thing. He would notice it himself every morning for the rest of his life. Regin was very angry and hid the whole of it. He had waited 11 years, and now he was going to wait through a war. Sigurd rode out first to see Gripir, his mother's brother, who was said to know what was coming and to say it if a man asked him properly. Gripir knew him before he was off the horse. He told him everything. He did not soften it, and he did not make riddles out of it. He had been asked plainly, and he thought riddles were for men afraid of the answer. He told Sigurd that he would kill the worm and take the gold. He told him he would come to a mountain and wake a woman in armour there, and swear oaths to her that he fully meant. He told him about a horn in another king's hall, and about forgetting her completely. He named a woman Sigurd had never heard of, and said he was going to marry her. He said he would win the first one back for another man, while wearing that man's face. He said that when it all came apart, it came apart on Sigurd and not on any of the people who had arranged it. He told him that he would die in his own bed in the morning, with a sword through him, put there by a man fed on wolf. Sigurd listened to the whole of it, and then asked 2 questions. He asked whether any of it could be turned aside. Gripar said that it could not. Then he asked whether he would be thought well of afterwards. Gripir told him that men were going to speak about him for as long as they spoke about anything at all. Sigurd got back on the horse. That was the part of him men came back to afterwards. He was told the exact shape of it in daylight by a man with no reason on earth to lie to him. He went anyway, and he did not go grimly. Holprek gave him ships and men for his father's vengeance, and they went south along the coast in the autumn. A storm took them off a headland on the 3rd day. It came down out of clear weather, and the sea got up under them fast, and men began cutting gear away to keep the ships upright. But there was a man standing on the rocks in the middle of it. He was not sheltering. He called out to ask who was commanding, and then he asked to be taken aboard. They put in and got him off the rock, and afterwards not one of them could explain how it had been managed in that water. Sigurd asked him his name. He said that his name was Hnikar. Then he said that some men called him Fjolnir and some called him Feng. He gave the 3 of them the way a man gives 3 names belonging to 3 different people. The storm went off while he was still coming over the rail. He sailed with them a day and told them how to read what they saw before a fight. He told them which birds meant what. He told them what it meant when a man stumbled going out of a doorway. He said that a man who fought facing into the setting sun had already given something away. Then he was not aboard any longer. Nobody had seen him go over the side, and the weather stayed fine the whole way down the coast. Lingvi met them with everything he had left, and his brother Horvard was on the field as well. It went on the whole of a day, and Sigurd was in the front of it from the first hour. Men who came home said that a line did not hold anywhere near where he was standing. They said they had seen his arms red to the shoulder. They said that he was not shouting, and that nobody near him was shouting either, and that this was somehow the worst part of it. He killed Lingvi, he killed Hjorvard, he killed every son of Hunding who came onto that ground. He did not do any of it gently, and nobody had asked him to. He brought the ships home in the winter with more men than he had left with, which was a thing very few of them ever managed. Regin was standing in the yard when he came up from the water. He had been standing about in yards for a long time. He did not ask about the battle. He said that the weather on the heath was good in the spring, and that a man who wanted to dig would find the ground open by then. Behind him, Grani was already saddled in the dark, with an empty pack strapped on and nothing at all in it. Part 11. Gnitaheath. They went up onto Gnitaheath in the spring when the ground had opened as Regin said it would. It was a long slope of open country with nothing standing on it. There had been heather there once, and the roots of it were still in the ground, black and dry and packed close together, but nothing green had come up out of them for years. The soil over the rock was thin. There were no trees anywhere on it. There were no birds on that ground, and none in the air above it. And a man crossing the heath heard his own feet and nothing else at all. But there was one track. It ran from the high ground down to the water. It was not a track that anything with feet had made. It was worn into the rock itself, about as wide as a hall was long. Something had gone down it and back up it for a great many years and polished the middle smooth, the way one family wore a doorstep hollow. At the edges the stone was scarred where the flanks had dragged. The smell was the thing men remembered. It was not rot and it was not smoke. It sat near the smell of a forge with the fire banked down for the night, and there was something under it that made the back of the throat close. It got into wool and stayed. Men who crossed that heath threw their cloaks away at home and did not explain why. Nothing had been farmed within 9 miles of it in living memory. Regin's plan was simple and it was a good one. Regin did not expect Sigurd to live through it. He told him to dig a pit in the middle of the track, get down into it and wait. When the worm came over, he was to put the sword up through the belly. The belly was the only part of the thing that was still soft. Everything else on it had gone to horn. Sigurd was down in the pit with a spade when an old man came along the track. He had a long beard and he was not from anywhere near there. Sigurd had seen him once before standing at the edge of a river and did not say so. The old man asked what he meant to do about the blood. Sigurd said that he had not thought about the blood. The old man said that a worm of that size held more of it than a man could picture. All of it would come down into a hole with a man sitting at the bottom. He said Sigurd would drown in there before the thing above him had finished dying. He told him to dig several trenches instead of one, and to cut channels between them so the blood ran off down the slope, and to lie in the middle one. Sigurd thanked him. He turned to ask something else, and there was nobody on the track. He dug all that day. At dusk he lay down in the middle trench and pulled the turf over himself. The ground began to move a little after dark. He felt it before he heard it. The rock under his back knocked twice. Then the knocking came closer together until it was steady, and dust began coming off the sides of the trench onto his face. Then the venom came on ahead of the body. It went over the trench in a spray and hit the stone. The stone hissed where it landed, and some of it came down through the turf a foot above his head. But then the light went out of the sky over the trench and stayed out. He put the sword up with both hands under the left shoulder. He drove it into the hilt, and then further until his fists went in after it. The whole weight of the thing went over him and past him, opening itself the length of its own belly as it came. The blood came down exactly as the old man had said it would. It filled the middle trench and went out along the channels and away down the slope, and it was still running an hour later. The worm got a long way up the heath before it stopped. It thrashed there for some while and broke the rock in several places and knocked flat what was left of Regin's shelter 1/2 mile off. Then it lay still. After a time it spoke. It asked who he was and who his father had been. Sigurd did not answer at first. A dying man's curse carried a long way in that country, and a dying worm's would carry further. But it asked again, and he found that he did not want to lie to it, and he told it. Sigurd. It said Sigmund's son. Then it lay there a while, working that out. After that it told him about the gold. It will be your death, it said. Every man who has owned it has died of it. I have owned it longer than any of them, and I'm dying of it now. I'm the only one of them who watched it happening while it happened. Sigurd said that every man died, and that most of them died owning nothing at all, and that he would rather have the gold. I was a man, the worm said. I want you to understand that I did not become this quickly. There was no morning when I woke up changed. I lay down on it because it was mine and because somebody might come. I got up less often. After a while I stopped finding any reason to get up at all. I did not notice my hands going. I noticed my father's face going. Then I could not remember what he had looked like. And then I could not remember that I had ever known it named Regin before it went. It said that Regin had sent him, and had sent him for a reason, and that he should think hard about what that reason was. Then it stopped. Regin came up out of the heather about an hour later. He knelt and drank his brother's blood out of the ground. Then he said, without being asked, that Sigurd had killed his brother and could not be held entirely blameless in it. He said that all he wanted was the heart, roasted. He asked Sigurd to do it while he slept, because he was tired. Sigurd cut the heart out and set it on a spit over a fire of heather roots. The blood came up out of it and stood in beads along the surface. He put a finger against one of them to find out whether the thing was done, and burned himself and put the finger in his mouth. And then he could hear the birds. There were nuthatches in the rocks above him. There had not been a bird on that heath in 20 years, and there were 7 of them up there now, and he understood every word they said. The first one said that Sigurd ought to be eating that heart himself instead of cooking it for a smith. The second one said that Regin was lying down the slope, planning it out, and that he would come up as soon as he was rested and take the head off a man who trusted him. The third one said that a man who left an enemy alive on an open heath had not finished his work. There had been 2 brothers in this business from the start, and both had wanted the same thing. The fourth one said that on a mountain away to the south there was a woman asleep inside a wall of fire in armour, and that she was the wisest living thing in the world, and that a man who once woke her would never afterwards want very much else. Sigurd went down and took Regin's head off with the same sword. He did it while the man was asleep, which was the only act of his life that men afterwards found fault with. The birds had been right about all of it. He ate part of the heart. He kept the rest of it. The gold was in a chamber under the ground where the worm had lain. There was an iron door, and it stood open, because nothing on that heath had needed a door for a very long time. Inside there were helmets and mail, and a great deal of worked gold, and 1 ring. He loaded it into 2 chests and put them up on Grani. But Grani would not move at all. Sigurd said the things a man says to a horse, and it made no difference whatever. Then he got up into the saddle himself. Grani went off down the heath at a walk with the whole of it up behind him, as though there were nothing back there but air. He rode south for 4 days. On the 4th evening he saw a light on a mountain a long way ahead. It was too steady for a fire, and it was in the wrong part of the sky for a sunset. It was still there when he woke in the morning, burning quietly on the top of Hindarfell, with nothing round it for miles in any direction. Part 12. Hindarfell. The mountain took him the best part of a day to get up. There was no path on it. The ground went up in long shelves of rock with turf between them. The light on the summit did not get any brighter as he came at it, and it did not move. But it was not a fire on the ground, it was a wall of fire, and it went the whole way round. It stood higher than a hall, it burned with no wood under it, and it made no smoke at all, and the grass at the foot of it was not even scorched. Sigurd put Grani straight at it without slowing. Grani did not slow either. They went through it, and it did not touch either of them. Inside there was a rampart of shields set edge to edge in a ring. Inside the shields there was a banner. Under the banner somebody lay on the ground in full mail asleep. He took it for a man anybody would have. He lifted the helmet off first. The hair came down out of it, and it came a long way down, and he stood there for a while, holding a helmet and not doing anything else. But the mail would not come off. It had grown into her. It had lain on her long enough to take root in the skin along the ribs and the arms. It had closed over the way bark closes over a nail left in a tree. He cut it from the neck downward with Graham, and it opened like cloth. It did not mark her anywhere. She woke up, she sat up and greeted the day and the sons of the day and the night and her daughters. She asked them to look kindly on the two people sitting on that ground. Then she asked him who had cut the mail. He told her his name and his father's name. She said that she had been waiting a long while, and that she had known roughly what to expect. She had been a shield maiden, and she had gone into battles and decided them. There had been two kings in a fight, Hjálmgunnar, who was old, and Agnar, who was not. Odin had promised the day to Hjálmgunnar. She gave it to Agnar instead, because she thought Agnar was the better man. Nobody had ever told her that her own judgment was the wrong instrument to use. Odin put a sleep thorn in her for it. He told her that she would never win another battle and that she would be married. She said that she had answered him that she would marry no man who knew how to be afraid. He put her up on that mountain and set the fire round her and left her there. She did not say how long she had been lying in it, and he did not ask her. It was plain enough from her hands that it had been a very long time. Then she taught him. She had him sit down. She brought out a horn and gave it to him, and she began. And she went on for most of the afternoon, and she never once raised her voice. She taught him ale runes, to be cut on the horn and on the back of the hand, with a leek laid in the drink, so that no other man's wife could put a thing in his cup and have it work. She taught him sea runes, to be cut into the oar and burned onto the rudder and scored into the blade, so that a ship that went out came home. She taught him branch runes, which were for healing, and told him where on the body they were to go, and that they should be cut in the bark of a tree whose branches leaned east. She taught him speech runes, for a man standing up to talk in an assembly full of people who wanted him to sit down. She taught him mind runes, and she said that those were the ones worth having, and that a man who had them would never afterwards be the second cleverest person in a room. Then she gave him the counsels, and there were 11 of them, and she gave them slowly. She told him to be clean with his kin and slow to take vengeance on them, because that kind of debt kept. She told him not to swear an oath unless he meant to keep it, because a broken oath put down a root, and the root came up somewhere he was not watching. She told him never to answer a fool who spoke to him in a crowd. She told him that a bad man never paid a good word back. She told him to be careful of a woman met on a road, and more careful of the daughters of men he had killed. She told him that when he went to a feast he should sleep the night out there and not walk home in the dark. She told him where to bury a body he had made, and to look at the head and the hands and the feet before he covered it. She told him not to trust a man whose father he had put in the ground, because there was a wolf lying inside a young son. She told him to watch a friendship as carefully as he watched an enemy. But she told him last of all that she could see what was coming. She said that it was going to be very bad, and that not one thing she had said to him all afternoon would be any use against it. Sigurd said that he would not run from it, whatever it turned out to be. He said that he had no intention of spending his life being careful. He meant it, and she knew that he meant it. That was the reason she had spent the whole of that afternoon teaching a man she had already been told she was going to lose. They swore to each other before he went down. She swore that she would have no man but him. He swore that he would have no woman but her. Neither of them put a condition on it, and neither of them asked for one. He went down the mountain in the evening. Behind him the fire came together again over the gap the horse had made, quietly the way water closes. Part 13. The Ale of Forgetting. He rode south into the country of a king called Heimer, who had married Brynhild's sister Beckhild, and who kept a good house. There was a tower there with a bar at the top of it, and Brynhild was in it when Sigurd came. She had got there before him. She sat with her women and worked a hanging in gold thread. What she was working was Sigurd. The heath was in it, and the trench and the worm and the fire on the mountain. She had been working at it since before anybody in that house had heard he was on the road. His hawk got away from him in the yard and went up and settled on her window. A boy went up the stair after it. She asked the boy who was below, and he told her, and she said that she had known since the morning. Then she put the needle down and did not pick it up again that day. They met in the bar, and neither of them said very much. They swore the same oaths over again, in a room in daylight with nobody there to hear it. They exchanged rings, and Sigurd gave her the ring he had taken out of Fafnir's chamber. And Veranot went on to her hand in that room, quietly, between two people who were pleased with each other, and neither of them thought about it again for a long time. It was the most ordinary minute in the whole story. He rode away in the morning and told her he would come back for her. South of the Rhine there was a king called Gujuki. He had 3 sons and 1 daughter. Gunnar was the eldest and the best to look at. Hogni was the one a man sent for when a thing had already gone wrong. Guttorm was younger than either of them, and he had been got by a different father, which came to matter more than anything else about him. The daughter was Gudrun, and there was Grimhild, their mother, who ran that house. She was clever, the way weather is clever. She knew a great deal more than a woman in a hall was expected to know. She used it the way a smith uses a hammer, without any particular feeling about it. Gudrun had a dream that winter, and it would not leave her alone. In the end she took ship north to ask Brynhild what it meant, because Brynhild's name for that kind of reading had travelled a long way. She had dreamed of a hawk with gold feathers, and that she loved it better than everything else she owned. Then she dreamed a hart came to her with gold on its coat, and she took it. It was killed at her knees, and its blood ran out over her feet. Then somebody put a wolf cub into her arms, and it spat at her with her brother's blood. Brynhild read it correctly and told her the truth about it. She said that a man was coming to her who was the best man living. She said that Gudrun's own mother would arrange the whole thing. She said that Gudrun was going to have him and lose him, and that her brothers would be in it up to the shoulder. She said that afterwards Gudrun was going to marry a king she did not want, and outlive nearly everybody she had ever loved. Gudrun said that this was a hard thing to be told in somebody else's house. Brynhild said that she had asked. Neither of them knew that they were talking about the same man. They both found it out on the same afternoon 4 years later, standing in a river. Sigurd came down to Juki's hall in the spring with the gold on Grani and 30 men behind him. They took him in and could not do enough for him, and he stayed. He went out with the brothers and fought beside them, and he was better than either of them, and neither of them minded it. That said a good deal about Gunnar and Hogni, and it stayed true of them for a long while yet. Grimhild watched him for a month. She worked out what he had and what he was worth and who he had already promised himself to. Then she decided that it was a waste, but she did not argue with him about it. She did not say one word to anybody in that house. She went away and made a drink. She carried it to him herself one evening in front of the whole hall, which was a courtesy and was understood as one. He took it and drank it, because a man did not refuse a horn out of the Queen's own hand. It did not hurt him. Everybody assumed afterwards that it must have, and it did not. It was not like being struck. It was like a door closing quietly in a house so large that he never heard it go. He put the horn down and went on with what he had been saying. There was a mountain in the south with a fire round it. There was a woman on the top of it who had taught him for a whole afternoon. Both of them went out of him the way a name went out of a man who had not used it in 20 years. They went completely, and without leaving any shape behind in the place where they had been. He married Gudrun that summer. He was good to her, and that was the part men left out when they told it afterwards. He was not a man going through the motions with the wrong wife. As far as he knew, there was no other wife anywhere. He liked her, and she turned out to be better company than anyone had thought to tell him. They had a son and called him Sigmund. He and Gunnar and Hogni cut their arms and let the blood run down into a trench in the earth. They walked under a strip of turf, lifted on 2 spears. They swore that each of them would avenge the others as a brother avenges a brother. But Gottarm did not swear it. He was thought too young, and nobody in that yard gave it a second thought. Brynhild sat in her own hall that autumn and watched a wedding she had built with her own 2 hands. She was satisfied with it. She had every reason to be. 4 days' ride to the north in a tower room. A woman who had been promised something was going quietly on with a gold hanging that had a man worked into it. There was a ring on her right hand that had come out of the ground underneath a dead worm. Part 14. The ride through the fire. Gunnar was not married, and his mother had noticed it. Grimhild put Brynhild's name in front of him at a good moment and let him think that it had been his own idea. He liked the sound of it a great deal. Everybody in the north had heard of her by then, and a man who married her would be talked about in 3 countries at once. They rode north to ask for her. Sigurd went along because Sigurd went everywhere with them now. Heimir told them what her father Budli had already told them. She would have one man and no other, and it would be the man who rode through the fire. She had gone back to a hall of her own by then and set the fire round it herself, so that nobody could claim afterwards to have misheard the condition. She was inside it waiting for the man she had sworn to. She had no way at all of knowing that he was standing out in that yard listening to the whole conversation, and did not know her name. Gunnar rode at the fire, and his horse turned at 40 paces and would not go back. He asked to borrow Grani. Sigurd gave him the horse without a word about it. Grani would not move for him. Gunnar put his heels in, and Grani stood in the grass and looked at the fire and did not shift a foot in any direction. But Grimhild had taught her sons a thing before they rode north, and Gunnar remembered it now. It was a way of trading shapes. 2 men who agreed to it took each other's faces and each other's voices and each other's height, and kept them until they both agreed to stop. Sigurd and Gunnar traded there on the grass, out of sight of the hall. Then Sigurd got up on his own horse, wearing another man's face, and rode at the fire, and Grani went into it at a gallop. The fire came up as he went in. It roared and rose and closed over the top of him, and the ground shook while it did it. Then it dropped again. There was a man on a grey horse standing in the yard on the far side, and the flames behind him were quiet. Brynhild came out with a sword in her hand, because she had heard the noise and did not know yet what it was. He told her that he was Gunnar, the son of Juki. He told her that he had ridden the fire, and that she was promised to the man who did it. She stood there a long time. She said that she did not want to marry anybody. She said that she was a shield maiden and had been one all her life. Then she said one more thing, which was that she had expected a different man to be standing in that yard. After that she kept her word, because keeping it was what she was, and she said that she would go with him. He stayed 3 nights, because 3 nights was the custom, and leaving sooner would have looked wrong to the household. He laid Gram unsheathed in the bed between them on the first night, and left it there for all 3. She asked him once why he had done it. He said that it had been laid on him to be married in that manner, and that he would take harm if he did otherwise, and he explained nothing further. She did not ask a second time. She lay on her own side of a drawn sword for 3 nights, next to a man she believed she had just bound herself to for life. She was not happy about any of it. She never once complained of it to a living person. On the last morning he took the ring off her hand. He did it the way betrothal gifts were exchanged, and there was nothing strange in it. He put another ring in its place, out of the same gold. The one he took away with him was Anvaranort. He rode out through the fire, and it let him go. They traded their shapes back on the road, and neither of them ever mentioned it to anybody again. Gunnar went home and said that he had ridden the fire. The hall believed him. There was no reason on earth for the hall not to. Brynhild came south in the autumn and was married to Gunnar at Juki's hall, and the feast ran for days. But Sigurd remembered everything on the second evening of it. It came back at once, and it came back whole. The mountain came back, and the ring of shields, and the mail opening under the sword, and an afternoon of runes, and 2 oaths sworn in a room with nobody else in it. He was sitting at a table with his wife on one side of him, and Brynhild 3 feet away on the other, married that morning to the man whose face he had been wearing. He did not move, and he did not change colour, and nobody at that table saw anything happen. He never told one living soul. He did not tell Gudrun. He did not tell Gunnar. He never told Brynhild. He carried it by himself for 4 years. It was the largest thing any Volsung ever did, and not one line in any telling of it ever praised him for doing it. He went on being good to his wife. He went on being a brother to Gunnar. And every so often across the length of a hall, a woman who had been given the wrong ring looked at him for slightly too long. Then she looked away and could not have said why she had done it. Part 15, 2 queens. There were 3 or 4 good years after that, and the telling of it slowed down in them. Juki's hall was the richest house on that river. There were hangings the whole length of the walls. The fires were kept in from autumn to the thaw, and there was always more meat in that house than the household could eat. Gudrun had a son who was walking. Brynhild ran her own house and ran it well. The 2 women were civil with each other and sat together in the evenings. They did not much like one another, for reasons neither of them had ever managed to put into words. Sigurd was the first man in that country in everything except name. Gunnar was king. There was no trouble in that, because Sigurd did not want to be king, and every man in the hall could see that he did not. But one summer afternoon the 2 women went down to the Rhine to wash their hair. Brynhild waded out further than Gudrun. Gudrun asked her why she had. Brynhild said that the water came down off her own hair and ran on down the river. She said that she did not care to wash in water that had run off, Gudrun's, because her husband was the greater man. Gudrun said that it would be nearer the truth to say that her husband was the greater man. since Sigurd had killed Fafnir and Regin and had taken the hoard off Gnitaheath. Brynhild said that Gunnar had ridden the fire and that Sigurd had never ridden it, and that riding it was the greater deed by a long way. Gudrun said nothing at all for a moment. She had 4 years of something small and unnamed sitting behind her teeth, and she had not known that it was there until that afternoon. Then it came out of her. She said that Gunnar had not ridden the fire. She said that the man who rode the fire was Sigurd, wearing Gunnar's face, by an arrangement between the two of them on the grass. She said that he had lain 3 nights inside that hall and had come out again with a ring. Then she lifted her hand out of the water and showed it. But Brynhild knew the ring. She had worn it on her own hand for a year. She said nothing whatever. She turned and waded into the bank and picked up her clothes and walked up to the hall, and she did not speak to one person on the way. She lay down on her bed, and she did not speak for 7 days. She did not eat in them, and she did not sleep in them, and she did not answer anybody who came to the door. Nobody dared go in. The whole household went quiet round her, the way a household does when it knows something has started and does not know what. Gunnar went in on the 4th day and got nothing at all. Ogni went in on the 5th and got less than that. On the 6th day, Gunnar asked Sigurd to go. Sigurd went in and sat down on the edge of the bed. He said that he knew what had happened and that none of it had been done to hurt her. He said that he had not known who he was on the day he did it. Then he offered in that room to put Gudrun away and take Brynhild instead. He was a man who did what he said he would do, and she knew that about him better than anyone. But she would not have it. She said that she would not take a second husband and that she would not take a first one twice over. She said that she had sworn to marry the man who rode the fire and had been given the man who rode the fire. She said there was no shape she could put on that which she was able to live inside. Then she said the true thing underneath all of it. She said that she could have borne every part of it except that he had gone on being happy afterwards. Sigurd told her that he had never stopped, not for 1 hour, and that the drink had taken the name and not the thing. She told him to go out. He went out. In the doorway the mail across his shoulders tightened, and the rings of it split open down one side. The men who saw it said afterwards that his chest had grown until the iron would not hold him. That was what they said about it. It was as good a way as any of putting what was happening to him. Then Brynhild sent for Gunnar. She told him that Sigurd had lain with her in the hall behind the fire. She told him that Sigurd had broken the oath he swore in the trench, and that Gunnar could decide for himself what a man did about that. It was not true. She had lain 3 nights with a drawn sword between them, and she knew it better than any person living. She said it anyway. She said it once. She never took it back. She had worked out by then that she could not have him. She could not go on living beside him either, and she could not stay in a country where he was going to grow old with another woman's children climbing on him. So she went through the only door that was still open to her. Gunnar sat by himself in the outer room a long while afterwards. He did not send for anybody, and he did not eat what was brought in to him. There was a line of torchlight under a door that had not opened in 7 days, and every so often it moved a little, because somebody on the other side of it was still awake. Part 16. The sword in the bed. Gunnar thought about it for 2 days, and then he went and found Hogni. He told him what Brynhild had said. He said that Sigurd had broken the oath. He said that a man who let a thing like that stand was not a king inside his own house. Then he said that the gold would come to them as well. He had not meant to say that part out loud, and he could not take it back once it was out. Ogni said the obvious thing first. He said that the two of them had stood in a trench and let their blood run into the same ground. They had sworn to avenge Sigurd as a brother avenges a brother. He said that he could see no way round that at all. He also said that Sigurd was the best man they would ever have on their side of anything. Then he said that Brynhild was not going to be pleasant to live with whichever way it went. But Gunnar had already found the way round it. Guttorm had never sworn. He had been thought too young on the day he had stood off at the side and watched the other three do it. Nobody in that yard had given it a thought at the time. They took him and they fed him. They gave him the flesh of a wolf and the flesh of a serpent boiled together, and they gave it to him in wine 3 days running. By the third day he was not what he had been. He was quicker and he was hotter. There was nothing left behind his eyes that would argue with a man about anything. They told him what they wanted done, and he did not ask one question about it. Ogni watched the boy through the last of those 3 days and did not like what he saw. He said so once to Gunnar out in the passage. He said that whatever was sitting in Guttorm now would not stop when they wanted it to stop. He said that neither of them had any way of putting it back where it came from. Gunnar said that it only had to last one morning. Hogni said nothing further about it, which was his way. It was the last thing anybody wrote down that he said before it happened. He went to the bedchamber at first light on the 4th morning. Sigurd was awake. He was lying on his back with his eyes open, and he turned his head, and Guttorm stopped in the doorway and went out again without a word. He came back an hour later. Sigurd was awake again, and looked at him again, and Guttorm went out again. But he went the 3rd time when the light had come up properly. Sigurd was asleep. He put the sword in under the ribs and pushed it through him and into the bed underneath, and the point went down into the boards. But Sigurd woke up. He got his hand round Graham where it stood against the wall, and he threw it after Guttorm as the man ran for the door. It took him across the waist and went through him. The upper half of Guttorm went out into the passage, and the leg stayed in the room. That was what happened, and nobody who told it afterwards made it any gentler. Gudrun woke with her husband's blood already on her. He was alive for some while after that, and he was completely clear in his head. He told her not to weep over him. He said that her brothers were still alive, which was more than most people got out of a morning like that one. He said that he had known for years how it would end. A man who had been told the day and rode out anyway had no business complaining about the hour. Then he told her who had done it. He said that Gunnar had not wanted to and had done it anyway, and that this was the worst of the 2 things a man could do. He said that Guttorm was a boy who had been fed something and could not be blamed for what came out of it. And he said that the whole of it had come out of one woman who had done it because she could not have him, and who had loved him better than anybody living had ever loved him, and that he did not hold 1 hour of it against her. He said that he had never broken the oath he swore to Gunnar in that trench. He asked for that to be said out loud in the hall afterwards, in front of everybody, and it was... Then he died. Gudrun cried out. It was one sound, and it was not a word. The drinking horns hanging along the wall rang against the boards with it, and out in the yard the geese came up off the water. Brynhild heard it from her own room, and she laughed. She laughed once, out loud, and the whole household heard her do it. Every person in that house understood at the same moment what she had arranged and what it had cost her to arrange it. Nobody who was there ever forgot the sound of it. She never made it again. Sigurd's son was 3 years old. Brynhild had asked for the boy as well, and it was done in the same hour, and he was laid on his father afterwards. She gave her gold away that afternoon. She called her women in and handed them what she had and told them to take it and go. Some of them would not go. Then she put on her mail, which she had not worn since the mountain. She lay down on the bed and set a sword under her arm and turned herself onto it. She was a long time dying, and she talked through most of it, and she was entirely calm. What she said came true afterwards in every particular. She told Gunnar that Gudrun was to be married to Atli of the Huns, whether Gudrun wanted it or not. She told him that he and Hogni were going to ride east to Atli's house, and that they would go knowing better, because that was what men of their sort did. She told him that Hogni's heart would be cut out of him living and carried across a room on a dish. She told him that Gunnar himself was going to die in a pit full of snakes with his hands tied behind him, and that it was not going to be quick. And she told him that Gudrun would burn that hall down with her own children lying dead in it. She said that everything the gold touched from this morning onward ended the same way until there was nobody left anywhere of any of them. Then she asked for one thing. She asked for a fire built big enough for two. She asked for Sigurd to be laid on it and herself beside him. She asked for a drawn sword to be set between them, exactly as it had lain on 3 nights in a hall behind a wall of flame. They gave her all of it. Nobody in that house was going to refuse her anything by then. They built it on the open ground the next day. It took the household the whole of that day to build. Men went out and came back with wood all morning. Nobody gave any orders that anybody afterwards remembered being given, and nobody stopped working. Gunnar did not come out of the hall at all. Hogni came out once and stood at the edge of the field with his arms folded for a long time and put nothing on the pile and went back inside. They put the wagon on it and the hangings out of her room and a great deal of the gold. They laid Sigurd on and Brynhild at his side and drew the sword and set it between them. 5 bondmaids went on with them and 8 of the servants, and Sigurd's son was laid at his father's feet. There was no wind at all that day. The smoke went straight up off that field for a very long way and stood over the river until nightfall. In villages 12 miles down the water, people came out of their houses to look at it. They stood in their doorways a while, then they went back inside without being able to say what it was they had been looking at. Part 17, The Wolf's Hair. Gudrun went into the woods behind the hall on the day of the burning, and she kept walking. She walked a long way. She went through country where nobody knew her, and she told nobody who she was. When she came to the sea, she took a ship, and she went to Denmark, because Denmark was where the ship was going. She stayed 7.5 years with Thora, the daughter of Hakon, and for the whole of that time nobody in Juki's country knew where she was. The 2 of them wove a hanging together in that house, and it took them years. It was a long one. Sigmund's ships were on it, going along a coast with their gilded heads and their beaks, and there was fighting worked into the southern end of it, Sigar and Siggeir down in the south. The ships ran the whole length of the cloth. They worked it in gold thread and in red silk and in a green that Thora had got off a trader and would never say what she paid for. They did the sails one winter and the shields the next. They worked at it in the mornings when the light in that room was at its best, and they stopped when it went. Thora's women came and went and were given the plain stretches to fill in. The 2 women who mattered never worked the same part of it at the same time. In 7 years they did not once disagree about a colour. Gudrun did not put Sigurd on it anywhere. That was the only rule she made about the work. She never explained it to Thora, and Thora never once asked her. But Grimhild found her in the 7th year. She came herself, and she brought Gunnar and Hogni with her. She brought gold, and she brought a settlement for Sigurd's death that was larger than anything that had ever been paid for a man in that part of the world. Gudrun told all 3 of them what she thought. She said it at length, and she did not raise her voice once. Hogni sat and took it. Gunnar looked at the floor. Then Grimhild gave her the 2nd drink. Gudrun knew what it was. That was what made it worse than the first one. She had watched her mother do this before to a better person than herself, and she knew exactly what was in the horn. She drank it anyway. She was tired, and it was easier than going on remembering at that pitch every day of her life. It did not take everything, it took enough. They married her to Atli, king of the Huns, who was Brynhild's brother. He wanted the Rhine gold, and he had not got it, and every person in the arrangement understood that, Gudrun included. She went east. She was a good queen there for years, and bore him 2 sons, and she did not forget one single thing, whatever the drink had done to the edges of it. Atli woke one night with a dream and told it at his own table the next day, in front of the whole household, which he should not have done. He said he had dreamed that reeds grew up out of the floor of his hall. He said he had dreamed that 2 hawks flew to him off his own wrist and were eaten, and he did not say what had eaten them. And he said he had dreamed there were 2 whelps in the hall, and that they were killed, and that he ate their flesh and thought it very good. Gudrun explained all of it away in front of everybody. She said that reeds meant a good season, and that the rest of it was only meat and weather. Neither of them believed a word of that, and both of them went on with the day. But Atli sent Vingi west that spring with an invitation. He asked Gunnar and Hogni to come and see their sister and take what was theirs. He offered them land and horses and gold. He offered a great deal more of all 3 than a visit was worth, and that was the part Hogni noticed. Gudrun got at the messenger's things before he rode. She cut runes into a strip of wood and put it in among the tokens, and the runes said plainly what was waiting at the other end. Vingi found it, he could read, which nobody had thought to check, and he scraped her runes down and cut different ones over the top of them and put the strip back. But he did not find the ring. She had wound a wolf's hair round a gold ring and sent it with the rest of it. There was no way of reading that wrong. They reached Juki's hall, and the invitation was read out, and the ale went round, and Gunnar was drunk before the messenger had finished speaking. Ogni's wife was called Kostbera, and she took the runes to bed with her. She sat up with a candle and turned the strip over in her hands for a long time. In the morning she said that the runes had been cut and then cut again. She said the 2nd carving lay over the top of the first, and that she could still make out what the first one had said if she held it up to the light. She told Hogni the whole of it. Then she told him her dream, and it was not a subtle one. She had dreamed that the bedclothes caught and that the fire went through the whole house. She had dreamed of a bear breaking in at the door and biting the men. She had dreamed of a river coming through the hall and taking the benches away. Glaumvor, who was Gunnar's wife, had dreamed the same sort of thing on the same night. She had dreamed of a bloody sword and a gallows standing up, and a woman coming into the hall and asking for Gunnar by name. Both women said plainly in the morning in front of both men that the 2 of them should not go. Ogni said what his family always said. He said that runes could be damaged in a saddlebag by a horse and a week of rain. He said that men lived until they did not. He said that turning back from an invitation over a wolf's hair and 2 bad nights would be talked about for 100 years in every hall on that river, and that he would rather go east and be killed than stay at home and be that. Cosbear said nothing more about it. She had been married to him a long time, and she had known what he would say before he said it, and she had said her piece anyway. Her mother had done the same, her daughter would do the same. They took a small company east and not an army. An army would have been an insult, and none of them would say out loud that he thought one was needed. They rowed themselves over the water at the border. When they got out on the far shingle, they pushed the boat back off it so hard that the strakes started along one side. They left it going away down the current behind them, and nobody said one word about it. Part 18. Atli's gate. Atli's stronghold stood on a rise, with a wall round it, and one gate in the wall. There were men on that wall when they came up the road, and there were a great many more of them than a household needed. Vingi was riding at the front, and somewhere in the last 100 paces he understood that he had brought them the whole way, and was going to be standing there when it started. He said a thing then that he should not have said. He told them that he had done it, and that they were finished, and he said it out of nerves and not out of malice. They took him off the horse and hanged him beside the gate before they went in. He was dead before the gate was open. It was a bigger hall than any of them had been inside before. It was built low and it was built long, and it was very dark in there after the road. The light came in through slits high up under the roof, in bars that did not reach the floor. There were hangings along the walls, but they were not Gudrun's work, and nobody had hung them with any care. Down the length of the room there were men standing who were not sitting down to eat. That was the thing the brothers noticed first, before anybody had said one word to them. Atli met them in the hall and did not pretend for very long. He said that the gold off Gnitaheath was his by right of his sister and his wife. He said that he wanted it. He said that they were going to tell him where in the Rhine it had gone in, and that the manner of the telling was up to them. Gunnar said that he would not. Hogni said the same thing, rather more shortly. Then it started, but Gudrun came down into the hall while they were still talking. She heard the rest of it from the doorway. She went and put her arms round both her brothers in front of everybody, and asked whether anything at all could be settled. Nothing could, so she threw off her cloak and took a sword down off the wall, and went in on their side against her own husband and her own household. That was not a thing that was done in that country, and she did it anyway. The fighting in that hall lasted 18 hours. The Niflungs killed more men in it than anybody afterwards could count. The count men gave was not believed, and it was probably low. They fought until there was no clear floor left to stand on. In the end they were not beaten. They were taken by weight of numbers and by being buried under men, and Hogni was taken last of all alive, having killed 20 of them after his shield had gone. Atli wanted to know where the gold was, and he had worked out how to ask. He said that he would have Hogni's heart cut out and shown to Gunnar, and that Gunnar would talk as soon as he saw it. But his own men did not want to do it. They went out and found a cook called Halli and dragged him in instead. He screamed the whole way. They cut his heart out on the table. They brought it in on a dish and set it in front of Gunnar. Gunnar looked at it and said that this was Halli's heart and not his brother's, and that anybody in the room could see it because it was shaking on the dish, and Hogni's heart had never shaken in its life. So they went and got Hogni. He laughed while they did it. It was told afterwards without any decoration at all, because it did not need any. He laughed while they cut the heart out of him. He was still laughing when they carried it away from him, and he did not stop until he was dead. They brought that one in on a dish as well. It lay completely still. Gunnar looked at it for a while. He said that now he was the only man alive who knew where the gold was. He said that he had been half afraid Hogni would tell them one day, and that he was not afraid of anything at all any more. He said that the Rhine would keep it, and that no Hun would ever put those rings on his hands. They tied his hands behind him and lowered him into a pit with snakes in it. The pit was old and it was deep, and it had been dug for exactly this. There was a lid of planks that went across the top of it, and a ring of men to stand on the planks. The snakes down there had been in it long enough to have stopped expecting anything. Gudrun sent a harp down after him. He could not use his hands. He turned the harp over with his feet and played it with his toes, and he played it so well that the snakes went to sleep on the floor all round him, all of them but one. There was an old adder that came up out of the dark side of the pit. It got in under his breastbone and lay there and worked at his liver until he died. Above him, on the boards laid over the pit, men stood and listened. The harp went on for a while after the playing had got slower. Then it went on a little longer, more quietly than before. Then there was one more note that was not really a note, and after that there was nothing left to listen to, and the men went away. Part 19, the feast. Gudrun went quiet after that. She stopped saying anything at all about her brothers. She sat at Atli's table and ran his house and did not weep where anybody could see her doing it. After a few weeks she began to be pleasant to him again. Atli took the quiet for grief wearing itself out. He was generous with her that autumn. He gave her things. He told his men that she had taken it better than he had expected, and that women came round in the end if a man was patient with them, and he was pleased with himself for having been patient, not knowing what had already been decided inside his own house, and never once suspecting the woman who sat at his left hand at every meal. Atli went about that winter in a very good temper. He had 2 sons by her. They were called Erp and Eitil. She found them one afternoon in a side room, playing on the floor with something they had made out of straw. They looked up when she came in. One of them asked her what she wanted. She told them the truth. She said that she was going to kill them both. She said it quietly, and she said it in ordinary words, because she had never lied to either of them before, and she was not going to start at the end. The elder one said that she could do as she liked with her own children, but that she would be ashamed of it afterwards for a very long time. She said that she knew that. Then she cut both their throats. She had their skulls made into cups. They were mounted in silver and gilded on the outside, and they went onto the table at the next feast along with the rest of the good plate, and nobody looking at them from a bench could have told what they were. She mixed their blood into the wine. She had their hearts taken off the bone and roasted on a spit, and she had them served to their father with honey, because he liked meat that way, and everybody in the kitchen knew it. The hall was got ready for that feast the way it was, got ready for any of them. The long fires were built up from noon. The good plate came out of the chest where it lived under a cloth, the silver dishes and the 2 great salvers and the cups. The cups were set out along the high table in a row, and a girl went down the line of them with a rag, breathing on each one and rubbing it until it took the light. She was in that room the better part of an hour. Nobody had told her anything at all. She did her work well, and she went out again. Atli was in a very good mood at that table. He ate what was put in front of him, and he drank what was poured for him, and he said twice that the food was better than usual. But Gudrun told him when the plates went out. She told him what he had eaten. She told him what he had been drinking out of. She named both boys, and she gave their ages, and she repeated what each of them had said to her in the side room. She did all of it in a level voice from her own seat, and she did not stand up to do it. But Atli did not shout. That was the thing about him that nobody in the hall had expected. He sat where he was for a while, then he said that she was a terrible woman, and that he wished she had been given to a better man than himself, because he had not been equal to any of it from the first day. Then he asked to be taken to bed. Men helped him out of the hall. He was drunk and he was old, and he had aged several years between the plates going out and the door. Ogni had left a son. The boy was grown by then, and his name was Niflung. He came to the house that night, and Gudrun let him in. She woke Atli first. She would not have him killed asleep, which was worth something in a woman who had done everything else that week. She woke him and told him what was standing in the room, and he looked at the two of them and did not call out. They did it together. Atli asked, while he could still ask for anything, to be buried well. She told him that he would be. She meant it, and he was. Then she fired the hall with the household inside it. The ones who ran out were cut down at the doors. The ones who stayed in burned. That was the end of Atli's house, and of everybody who had ever eaten in it, and in the morning there was nobody left in that country who could give an account of what had happened there. She walked down to the sea afterwards with stones in her arms, meaning to drown. But the water would not take her. It carried her, stones and all, a long way along the coast, and put her ashore in the country of a king called Jonaka. He found her on the beach, he married her, and he asked her nothing at all about where she had come from. She had 3 more sons in that house, and they were called Hamdir and Sorli and Erp. And there was one daughter there already who had been sent to be brought up in that country years before, and her name was Svanhild. She was Sigurd's daughter. She had her father's eyes, and everybody who had ever seen him said so inside a minute of meeting her, and by that time there were very few of them left alive to say it. She grew up among her half-brothers, and was the best-looking woman in the north, and word of her went south, the way word of such things always went. Part 20. The stones Jormunrek, king of the Goths, sent north to ask for her. He was old, and he was powerful, and he was a good match on parchment. He sent his son Randver to fetch her, and he sent a counsellor called Biki along with him to see it all done properly. But Biki was the sort of man who could not leave a settled thing settled. He said to Randver on the road that it was a waste. He said that the girl was young and the king was old, and that Randver was young as well, and that anybody looking at the two of them together would take them for the pair. He said it as an observation about the world. Then he let it sit there. Randver did not do anything about it. He did talk to her, and he sat with her in the evenings, and by the time they came south there was something between them that had no name yet, and might never have been given one. Biki went straight to Jormunrek and told him that it had a name. Jormunrek believed him. He had his own son taken out and hanged. Randver asked for his hawk before they led him away. They brought it to him. He plucked every feather off the bird and sent it in to his father, and he sent no message with it. Jormunrek looked at that hawk a long time before he understood it. It was a bird that could not fly any more, sent by a son to a father whose house could not fly any more either, because the father had just pulled the feathers off it with his own hands. He sent men running to stop the hanging. They ran, and they were not fast enough, and he had it to think about for the rest of his life. Then Bicky said the rest of it. He said that the girl had been in it as much as the boy, and that a thing like that had to be answered in front of everybody, or it would be talked about in every hall from there to the sea. They took Svanhild out to the town gate and bound her there and drove horses over her. But the horses would not do it. They were driven at her 3 times, and 3 times they went round her or stopped short of her, because she was lying there with her eyes open looking at them. No horse in that country would put a foot on her while she was looking. In the end, a man came out with a bag and drew it down over her head. After that, the horses did what they were driven to do. That was the last thing done to any child of Sigurd, of everything in this story. It was the piece that men in that country went on repeating the longest. Word of it got north inside the year Gudrun called her 3 sons in. She did not ask them anything. She got out mail that she had kept in a chest for a very long time, which no iron would cut, and she put it on all 3 of them with her own hands. Then she told them what had been done to their sister at a gate in the south. She told it in detail. She named the man who had ordered it. Hamdir said that she had wept for Hogni and had not asked anybody to die about it. Then he said that they would go. She had spent her whole life being given men she loved and getting them back on shields. She sent these 3 out herself, and that was the last thing she ever arranged. She stood in the yard and watched them go down the track until it turned. Then she went back inside and sat down, and she did not get up again for a long time. They rode east, the 3 of them, with nobody else at all. They went through country that got flatter as they crossed it and then got empty. They slept out on the ground. They did not talk a great deal, because there was nothing left to arrange, and because all 3 of them knew what the mail would do and what it would not do. The mail was the only thing they had brought. It would keep iron off them for exactly as long as the men in that hall went on using iron. On the road, Hamdir asked Erp what help he meant to give them when it came to it. Said that he would help them as one hand helps the other hand, or as one foot helps the other foot. They took it for insolence, because they were angry, and because he had a different mother and had always talked in that way. They killed him at the side of the road and rode on. They had not gone far when Hamdir's horse put a foot wrong. Hamdir went down and caught himself on his hand. He said that a hand did help a hand, and that Erp had told them the truth. A little further on, Sorli slipped crossing a stream and stayed upright because his other foot held him. He said the same thing about it. Neither of them said anything else for a long while after that. There had been 3 of them, and now there were 2, and the 3rd loss was the one that could not be got back. They came into Jormunrek's hall at night and went straight up the length of it. The mail held, swords came off it and did nothing. They cut the hands off Jormunrek, and then the feet, and they did it in the middle of his own household, and not one man in that room could stop them. The king was calling out from the floor for somebody to do something. They had meant to take his head that had been Erp's part of the work, and Erp was 3 days behind them at the side of a road. An old man had come into the hall while it was going on and was standing at the edge of it. He was very tall. He had one eye. He said, without raising his voice, that iron was not going to do it, and that they should use stones. The Goths used stones. It took a long time, and a great many of them. Hamdir and Sorli went down in the middle of that floor under a weight of rock, and neither of them asked for anything, and neither of them said the other's name. They were the last of the line. It had run out of everything at once, out of sons, and out of gold, and out of the one who had been coming down into it since the beginning. When the Goths looked round afterwards to see who had given them the advice, there was nobody standing there at all. The line was ended. The gold was never found. The halls stood empty for a while, and then they came down, but nobody went back for what had gone into the Rhine. The only man who knew the place had died in a pit with his hands tied behind him. He had worked that much out for himself before they lowered him into it. The gold is in the river still. Men have gone looking for it in every century since, and have brought up nothing at all. The water has kept it exactly as long as Gunnar said it would. The story went north, and it went south. It went into poems before anybody thought of writing it down. It was still being sung in halls 400 years after the last Volsung was under the stones. A man in Sweden cut Sigurd into a rock face beside a causeway, with the worm running along the bottom of it and the birds up in the tree. It is cut into that rock to this day. Carvers in a valley in Norway put the whole of it down the doorposts of a church, the forging, the trench, the burnt thumb, the birds in the branches. That church came down a long time ago. The doorposts were carried out of it and kept. They are standing indoors in a city now, in a quiet room, with a light on them. And a man in Iceland, whose name nobody troubled to write down anywhere, sat down with calfskin and ink. He set the whole of it out in order, from the snowdrift to the stones, so that it would not be lost. It was not lost. Whoever it was that sat in the high seat above the world got precisely what he had spent 5 generations building. He had wanted a line that did not bend. He got one. It did not bend at any point in any of it, not when the ships came in at dawn, not in the earth house, not on the mountain, not in the hall in the east where the plates went out. It never bent once, including all the times when bending would have saved every one of them. There's nothing anywhere in the story that says he was pleased with it. The Volsungs ended, the telling of them did not. It went north and south and into other languages and into other centuries, carried by people who had never heard of Hunland, and it has not once come to a stop. And there is no reason at all to think that it is going to.